Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Mr. Schultz, I'll leave it to you to kick it off whenever you are ready. But I think that we could get started whenever. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Mr. Schultz, I'll leave it to you to kick it off whenever you are ready. But I think that we could get started whenever.
All right, sounds good. Thanks so much, Mr. Cropper. And if everybody that is attending or on the panel, if you'll please mute your mics so we don't receive any feedback. And we'll begin here in about 1 minute. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. This is Brian Schultz. I am the Deputy Superintendent for Cabarrus County Schools. And I, along with Francis Lane and Cropper GIS, will have begun the middle school realignment process. This process came about as a result of our really our rapid growth here in Cabarrus County. And in addition, the rapid growth of the students enrolled in Cabarrus County schools. And as you may know, if you drive down Weddington Road and or Hickory Ridge Road out near Harrisburg, you'll know that we have two beautiful new schools that will open those facilities to students on October 19th, Hickory Ridge Elementary School and West Cabarrus High School. We're really thrilled that the county has provided funding for those schools. And in addition to that is continuing our capital project plan that we have here in Cabarrus County Schools. We have begun construction on a new middle school that will open up in 2022, in the fall of 2022. And that will be for the 22-23 school year. So it's about a year and a half from now, and it will fly by. And as part of that, we'll have to realign some middle school boundaries to accommodate students there at the new middle school. And so tonight we're gathering together to give you our first public information session on that project and how that will, and the timeline associated with it. So we've got a great team, an internal team. We will continue to offer public information sessions, and we will also have a public advisory committee as well as part of that. And you'll hear more about that really soon. So with that, just thank you for joining us tonight. We've got an amazing staff. We've got amazing consultant in Cropper GIS to support us with this work. And I will at this time turn it over to Matthew Cropper.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you all for participating in this public information session. As you know, we're doing this virtually. This is the public information session that we're doing online and inviting the public to watch and participate and observe this. This is also being streamed live on YouTube, and we'll also have it recorded so that a recording of this can also be shared with the public, and they can watch this after the meeting is done. A couple of things in preparation for this public information session is you'll notice on the Zoom call there are there's a chat button, or a Q&A button is what it is in there. And if you want, as we're giving the presentation, you can ask questions in that Q&A. And we have panelists who are serving, who are watching and monitoring Q&A, the staff and consultants, people from my office. And after the presentation is over, we will field questions and do some Q&A and answer questions that you may have once the presentation is over. So let's get right into it. The purpose of this public information session is really to inform you about the background of this project and some of the objectives of this project. We want to review some realignment criteria, and these are the rules that we will follow as we start looking at evaluating zone line changes and the feasibility of moving an area one place or another. I'm going to go over the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders so people have an understanding of how the different people at different levels will be able to participate and provide input through this process. We'll go over the timeline and then give you a little bit of background on how the tools that we've built and some of the detail that we've prepared for realignment, and then talk a little bit about how you can participate and how you can provide input as the process matures. A little bit about us. We are Cropper GIS Consulting. We're based out of Ohio, but we work out of home offices, and so we have staff that live across the United States, and we have 6 staff members, and they live all over the U.S. But we have done this kind of work with schools all over the United States. Our specialty is this kind of work: realignment, demographic study work. We help school districts with site facility planning and things like that. And I am Matthew Cropper. I'm the president of the company. This Cropper GIS Consulting has been around for since 2005. So it's been 15 years that we've been in business, and happy to be serving clients and honored to be working with Cabarrus County Schools. A little bit about the background and objectives. So in April 2019 and February 2020, the Board of Education approved new elementary, middle, and high school boundaries for the 2020-21 school year. So this year, some boundaries did go into effect with a realignment that occurred a year or two ago. Due to the increasing residential development and continued overutilization of facilities, they're still addressing overcrowding in the district. And so the middle schools are still operating over capacity in certain areas, primarily on the western edge of the district. And the district is planning a new middle school that's going to open in fall 2022, like Mr. Schultz said. So building a new middle school drives the need to create a zone for that middle school, which will provide capacity relief to the buildings that need it the most, and with following our rules and guidelines. So our objectives in this project are to explore and develop student realignment options through a community-based process. We're going to focus on developing options that best meet the realignment criteria, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We want to be remain knowledgeable about the 2019 process and attempt to minimize the impact on students who were moved at that time. Now, that 2019 process was comprehensive, and the area where the new middle school is being located was an area that underwent some realignment in that last process. So it's inevitable that that communities that were moved in the prior process will be impacted in this, but we will be mindful of that and try to minimize that as much as possible. But we should acknowledge that any student in the district could be affected as a part of this process. The focus here is middle school realignment, and trying to focus on middle schools. But with that said, we may need to make adjustments to elementaries and high schools to better align feeder patterns, and so that we don't end up with a very small percentage of an elementary split to a middle school. And if we have an opportunity to provide some better alignment of those feeders from elementary to middle, and it may necessitate a change at the elementary level or at the high school level, it may be something we'll consider. Although this is the case, we will be very mindful with the focus on middle school realignment and trying not to impact elementary and high school, minimize the impact at those levels, because this is really more focused on building a zone for the new middle school. And finally, we'll be recommending a plan to the school board in March of 2021. This plan will be delivered by an internal planning team, which I'll talk about, and that the recommendation will be brought forward to the school board by the deputy superintendent and consultants from Cropper GIS Consulting. So let's talk about the criteria. So these are basically a set of rules to follow. And when you start to evaluate the practicability of moving attendance zone lines, what we always have to ask ourselves is moving a line, making this adjustment, or considering this map draft, does it better align with the criteria? Our focus is to try to adhere to these criteria as best as possible as a whole. And we can't focus on one element of these criteria, because if we focus only on one element of the criteria or one item of the criteria, we start to deviate from others. So the best plan and the best recommendation will be one that addresses these criteria as well, as good as we can, and while still accomplishing our objectives. So these criteria are to balance facility utilization. So being mindful of what the school's capacity is, how many students are in the building, and how full the building is. And in other words, utilization. So we'll be looking at how full the buildings are, what their current utilization is, and trying to bring those utilization numbers down in line so that there's an equitable amount of seats available. We're going to be looking at future growth, though, accounting for future growth, and not only looking at balancing utilization among schools, but if there's an area that has a lot of growth potential, we may decide to give that school more space to grow into. So we may end up bringing a school at a lower utilization in our plan so that they can adapt and sustain future planned growth in an area. And I know you have a lot of growth potential in this county. We've worked with Cabarrus County for the past couple of years and know it pretty well. And you are one of the faster growing areas that we've worked with. And so that's something, that challenge that you're going to continue to face in this county, in this district. We're looking at close proximity. So students should be assigned to the school closest in proximity to their homes whenever possible. And maximize busing efficiencies and transportation. And that goes hand in hand with the proximity element. So trying to be mindful of transportation efficiency. You have a lot of roads and highways and major roads that span through the county, and we're going to be looking at those major routes and anticipating where buses may travel as students go from home to school. And it's inevitable that students will be crossing over those roads and things like that because it's a large county, but we'll be looking at busing efficiency and transportation. We have people from transportation that'll be working with us and evaluating options as we draft them. Establish clear feeder patterns and continuity. So this is trying to look at the progression from elementary to middle and from middle to high school. So we basically want to look at, and we will be analyzing, how are we impacting feeder patterns? So does a school right now feed 100% from elementary into middle school? And in any option, what happens to that school? So does it then split 50-50? In a best case scenario, if you have to split a school, it's better to split it down the middle, 50-50. So half the students go to one school and half the other go to another school. If you have to have a split. And that's just so that students can maintain those social dynamics of friends that they've made at the earlier level and moving into the next level and with familiar faces and things like that. We want to try to avoid very small splits. So if you see like a 90% going to one middle from an elementary and then only 10% of an elementary going to another middle, that's something that we will evaluate, we'll flag it and see if we can fix that and see if we can try to resolve that small split. Some cases we may not be able to, just because of the nature of how much capacity we have to work with in schools and how the distance to schools and all the other criteria. But feeder patterns will be something that we will be looking at pretty closely. Allowing for the highest grade at current school to legacy enroll. So this is basically something that allows students who will be in 5th, 8th, or 12th grades in the first school year of realignment to stay at their current school. So if your child or the student is going into the 5th grade or 8th or 12th grade when the year that this is implemented, which is fall 2022, they have the option to remain at their current school and not move as their neighborhood may be zoned. The one provision with this is that it does not extend to siblings. And so we want to try to, you have to try to control this so that you don't have too much overcrowding, and you need the legacy enrollment concept is something to try to further reduce the impact on families, but it also has to come to an end at some point so that the planned utilization of a school ends up being what we anticipate it to be. So for that reason, siblings are not eligible to travel with their student if they do legacy enroll. And finally, transportation will not be provided for a student who opts to legacy enroll, and they must provide their own transportation and have their own transportation provided to get to that school. And so another criteria are to minimize the impact on students. So we'll be quantifying how many students are impacted in any particular option. And we will be attempting to minimize the amount of students who are impacted. And they're building a new middle school, and we're populating a new middle school. So it's inevitable that there is going to be a decent number of students impacted. But with that said, we will be counting the kids, understanding how many students are moved in any particular option, and then evaluating whether this option is better in terms of the criteria. Does it better adhere to the criteria if and it moves more students? And there may be a case where the recommendation may be the one that moves the greater number of students if it adheres to the other criteria very well. And so, but the impact on students is something we'll be tracking and monitoring and being mindful of. Account for economic, cultural, and ethnic diversity. So ensure schools are inclusionary and not adversely affected by realignment decisions. So we'll be looking at the demographic dynamics of the schools, and then we'll also be reporting on what the demographics are of the schools in any particular option, so that we can be mindful of what kind of impacts there may be on the demographics of that particular school. Make every effort to establish contiguous zones. So this is trying to avoid creating a satellite zone and going into an area and pulling a subdivision out of an attendance area and assigning it to a school that sort of hop skips across the zone. And you end up with one large zone for the school and then one small satellite area, we call. And that's something that is not best practice. It's something that we certainly will not work into this scenarios as we start to develop them. It's best to have one zone per school. To use major roads and natural boundaries wherever feasible to define attendance zones. And so this is to minimize the amount of students who need to cross over these major roads and other barriers. This really goes in hand with a lot of the different safety elements of getting kids to school as safe as possible, also transportation efficiency, and other things like that. And it's just best practice to use major roads if possible to define the zone. So maybe align it along interstates and highways if possible, and major rivers and railroads, things like that may be maybe a good break in population, where it's sort of a natural break or man-made break that we could use to divide to establish zones. And like I said, all these criteria are in no particular order of priority, and the best plan is going to be one that touches on all these criteria as best as possible, and with a focus on all of them as best as we can. So let's talk about the stakeholder roles and responsibilities. So you can see we have a table here that provides you a breakdown of the different groups that we're engaging with and working with. We have the consultant, the internal planning team, we have a public advisory committee that I'll talk about, and then we have the general public, superintendent, and then the school board. So the consultant is Cropper GIS Consulting, and we are scheduling and facilitating meetings with these different groups, and also facilitating the public information sessions. We are working to develop all the materials for the realignment efforts. So the mapping and the statistics and data and handout materials, and all of the utilities that we are providing are all managed by us. And so we are supporting the district and providing other materials as needed. And then also we're coordinating and summarizing feedback. So we have some methods for you to provide input to us. And I'll go over that here in a minute, but we're also monitoring that feedback and reporting that back to the groups. So we will be working through all of this to help this group and help the community develop a viable option, a viable recommendation, and you finally utilizing our expertise and our experience in doing this for school districts all over the United States. The internal planning team is a group consisting of school district administrators, there's central office staff, transportation, the Office of Planning, and school principals are also on this internal planning team. This group is the group that really is working dynamically together to review draft options and then modifying options and working to build options to start sharing with the other stakeholders. So this internal planning team is the core group that will be finally recommending a plan to be presented to the school board. But we will be looking at garnering input from different stakeholders throughout the course of the study as we work to develop some options to share with you and also meet with the Public Advisory Committee. So this is the group that will be recommending a realignment plan to the school board. The Public Advisory Committee is a sampling of community members. And so we're in the process right now of formulating this Public Advisory Committee. And you'll see it also referred to as a PAC, a PAC. There is an application process that's currently underway to serve on this Public Advisory Committee. The deadline to apply for this PAC is October 18th, 2020. And so we'll give you some details on where you can go to apply to serve on this. And this is a sampling of community members. What we're really looking for is more of a focus group that we can bring together and start to share some concepts and draft options as we start to work through and have some maps that we're starting to deliberate on. We want to have some input from local community members. We're going to try to make sure that the members of this PAC come from different parts of the area in the county, so that we don't have majority of members coming from one subdivision. We're going to be looking and sharing information with this PAC, and they will be giving us feedback and initial input as it relates to the maps that may drive some changes. Again, we'll be instructing the Public Advisory Committee to focus, when we start orienting them on maps, focusing on the overall objectives and criteria, and making sure that we stress objectivity and working and providing input on a basis of what's best for all children in the county and not just one neighborhood or one community. These members are not there to represent a neighborhood or a school or a subdivision. They're there basically to help provide input from a holistic point of view as best as they can. And the Public Advisory Committee will not vote on a recommendation, but their input is going to be very helpful in giving us some early feedback as we prepared options to share with the public. And we're looking at about 8 to 10 members to serve on this Public Advisory Committee. And like I said, the application process is open right now, and we encourage you to apply to serve on this. This is just an example or a screenshot of what the application looks like. We're going to take these applicants once the deadline it comes here in a couple of weeks. We're going to collect all of the applications. We're going to map them out and see where all the applicants live and make sure that we select a good geographically distributed group of people to give us input from different areas of this as it relates to this study. So we're really looking forward to working with the public in this regard, and hoping that you apply and consider serving on this Public Advisory Committee. The general public is certainly still involved in this process. And so there's a website that the district is maintaining that has information on that. And then also we are managing a web page that has a lot of material on it as well. There's a feedback form right now that's out there that the public can start to provide input on. And we're going to be looking at that feedback form closely. We check it every day to see what new comments may have come across when we work on these projects. And we do listen and we do study. So if you say, I live in this area, or I live in this subdivision, or I live at this address, we will go to the area that you're talking about and try to get an understanding of your concern. And then we'll evaluate that as it relates to the criteria and then share this information and discuss it with the other groups. And so your voice is being heard and it will be heard. And it's important to provide input as it relates to the area you live in and just general feedback regarding the process and any maps that start to get generated. One final thing is that we will have another public information session in a few months here where we'll start sharing some draft options. We don't have any maps put together yet to share publicly. We haven't even shared any maps with the internal planning team yet. We're still in the process of developing some things and preparing for that. But when we do get ready, and we are ready for that, we'll invite you to another forum like this where you can look at some maps that we're creating, that we've drafted, and get some feedback from you. We'll probably have a Q&A session as well at that session, but then also there will be a survey that's designed to get some additional input from you. The superintendent will be working with the internal planning team and monitoring progress. The superintendent really is not going to be around the table at every single meeting. They're really more of a high level, making sure that that they have all the staff and the internal planning team and everybody has the supports they need to do their job. And the superintendent will also be updating the school board on progress being made through the course of the study. Finally, the school board is working at a higher level. They're charging the committee with its responsibilities. They're looking at the school board really handles questions that are more policy related, things that are not in the power of the other stakeholders, and things that larger decisions such as legacy enrollment, things like that, and the criteria. Those are things that the school board typically work to make sure they have a framework in place and for this process. And the school board will vote and approve on a realignment plan. We will have a school board member. We will have a school board member coming into the internal planning team meetings to have a liaison, and they can provide input as well and give insight to their constituents and to their school board, other school board members about the process. And so I think that's a good idea to have somebody there, and so that they can kind of have a better understanding of how the work is being done in these different meetings with the different stakeholders. So this is our timeline. And so you can see here, we have been working over the past couple of months and preparing, collecting data, but we're still at the beginning stages of this process. We're collecting data, converting all this information into GIS format. We're developing some options so that we can start working with the public, to the internal planning team, and also preparation for the public advisory committee. You can see here we are, October the 8th is our first public info session. We're going to be from after this point, we're going to be working with the internal planning team together to prepare for the first series of public advisory committee meetings and sharing some draft options with them. So in the next couple of weeks, the internal planning team will start reviewing options and drafting options and making changes and really trying to evaluate how many options can be developed, with a focus on bringing some things to the public advisory committee. And once we start sharing things with the public advisory committee in November, that's when maps could potentially start to be shared with the public. And so you can start seeing some of the drafts that are being considered as we work through this process. We want to start sharing those with you as soon as we can, but we also don't want to put things out there in their infancy. So this process goes all the way to March 2021. You can see we've got a series of these public advisory committee meetings scattered about. And then there's a public information session in December where we'll be bringing some maps back to you to share with you as members of the public and to get input from you. And so really getting input, trying to solicit feedback from these different groups, public advisory committee, and also the internal planning team to try to develop a scenario or a realignment plan that works best for Cabarrus County. So just breaking down the process, I did it in pretty good detail, but the data collection process, we're collecting information. We've collected a lot of information from the county government, from the school district has given us student information, capacity and utilization information, location of the new schools, those kinds of things. So a lot of information has been collected to prepare for this process. We've taken that information and converted it into GIS format, and whatever wasn't already converted, student databases were mapped out so that we have all the students on the map and looking at where they live and understanding, being able to make efficient, accurate decisions, and everything else getting put into our mapping system so that we can be efficient and accurate as we start to analyze realignment options. So we have built some things for you, and this is something that we wanted to talk about, and this is just basically part of the data analysis and assimilation part of our phase work, is that we've created something called planning blocks, and we use these in the last realignment study. So if you were involved in the last realignment study, you may be familiar with these. These are basically building blocks for realignment. So we take an elementary attendance area or a middle school attendance area, and we break it up into smaller pieces, with the focus on those criteria. So we're trying to keep communities together and not split the line down a residential street, for example, and trying to keep communities intact. So if an area moves, it moves together. But we're also trying to make them granular enough so that we have a good variety of opportunity to create options to achieve our objectives and criteria. So when you start looking at maps on here, you'll notice a PB 17 is the one I'm looking at in the center of the screen. That indicates the planning block number. So that's planning block 17. So if you're giving feedback, you can always tell us what planning block you're in, and then that can help give you a little orientation on, and that helps us understand exactly where you're located. The bottom number on the label shows the number of students that live in that area per that particular grade level, and that goes to their neighborhood school. So in this case, there's 16 middle school students that live in this area and attend their zone school. We're going to be looking at the program choice students that are coming in and going, and the way we're estimating enrollment, we're preserving that flow of students in and out so that we don't overload a building with students living in a zone and it doesn't have enough kids to come from out of zone for a program. So these are some numbers that you can understand how many kids live in a particular area, and you can even understand maybe why did they move this area versus another area. Some of these may have 3 kids, some of them may have 58, 60, or 80 students or even more. And so we try to keep them as small as we can without splitting up a subdivision, and that's the planning block data. We've also developed an online interactive map, and this is a map that just helps really inform you and facilitate the process. This is a map that the district is using a public-facing map already for school locator and school lookups, and we're building a separate side map focused on the realignment effort. This is the interactive map. It's croppermap.com/CCS realignment is the website address for this. And I'll just give you a little preview. As you zoom in on this map, more features start to show. You have a list of layers over here on the left. So you can click this down arrow and it expands and shows you some layers that you can interact with. Planning blocks, for example, you can turn on the planning blocks and see the planning block outlines. And then you could see things like the 6th through 8th graders, like I was talking about, that live inside each of these planning blocks, and the labels pop up. You can start to turn on, say, middle school zones, which is going to be our focus. As you zoom in, more information starts to show up. So I'm just double clicking to zoom in. And as I double click and go in, more information starts to pop up. And you can even also use the plus sign here. So you start to see parcel lines and properties. And as you go in more information starts to show the more detail on the aerial. And even as I think if you go in far enough, you can even see your address numbers on the properties. And so another thing that's useful in here that we use as a utility is neighborhoods and communities. This is just a layer that you can turn on that shows you an overview of communities, and there is an outline here on them. You can probably set the transparency a little bit. You can adjust transparency on this to make it more visible, the outlines, so you can see the neighborhoods and communities. I use this if I'm zooming in the area and I want to know what's the name of this subdivision on the map that I'm looking at here. But one of the things that I think is more useful is to zoom to a neighborhood. And so you can select a neighborhood and you can zoom to where you live. Say you live in Arrowhead Place, and it'll zoom to your neighborhood. And then you can zoom out and see your neighborhood, a subdivision, and then you can toggle on and off the different layers and see how the layers interact with your neighborhood. Once we start developing options and maps that we're going to share with the public, we'll start putting draft options in here. So you see the 2020-21 middle school zones. Eventually, you'll start seeing draft option 1 middle school, draft option 2 middle school, and so on and so forth. So this is a really good utility tool that we use to help inform us, and I think that it's something that you'll find to be useful as we start to develop options. The third phase of this process is the options development, and so we will be working to develop some drafts for the internal planning team, just for starters, and we'll create some baseline options based off of our expertise, and we are the mapping experts, and so we have an eye for developing options with a focus on the criteria and the objectives, and we have a lot of experience in looking at the 3 different dimensions. So okay, we make a move at a middle. Now what are we doing at elementary and high school? And so, with that experience, we find it's best to bring a series of options for starters for the public, for the committees to start working with, and the internal planning team to start working with. And those maps certainly are just a starter point, and they can certainly be modified and adjusted based off of continual review and input from the different stakeholders. The fourth phase is the internal planning team and public engagement process. And so this is where we'll be working with the groups and talking through maps and things like that. So this is a video that shows a committee meeting that we were doing, and we have a snippet of this from Baltimore. You see the groups working in small tables, and we're doing this virtually. We're not doing a face-to-face meeting process in this particular effort, but we'll be working if needed. We have the ability to break the group into smaller groups and work in small group discussions and things like that. And so we're doing a really good job at other districts, and we'll do our best to try to mimic an in-person process that we have shown to be very successful, and doing it virtually. And it's working very well in other districts. We're actually seeing more participation in many cases in meetings and virtual meetings versus meetings that are hosted at facilities. So a few reminders: the deadline for applications to serve on the PAC is October 18th, 2020. So I would encourage you guys to please consider serving on that, and we'll evaluate, and we will notify members, everybody who applied, whether you were selected or not. Be mindful that we were only picking about 8 to 10 members to serve on this PAC, and so there will be people who are not selected, and in most cases it's not because you aren't qualified, it's just because we're trying to find a subset of people that live in different areas of the county, and not everybody can serve on it. Our next public information session for the public is scheduled for December 17th, 2020. So at that meeting, we will be sharing some draft maps with you. So I would please mark your calendars for that, and the district will advertise that and make sure that you're aware of an upcoming public information session for that particular on that particular date. Some ways that you can participate and also follow the process are the district has a student realignment page. This page is cabarrus.k12.nc.us/realignment. And that'll take you to their landing page, which shows here. And then this will have a repository for information that we will be sharing with you. In addition to that, we're managing a page where we can control and keep putting materials on a website that we're managing, and that you'll be able to get to this from the realignment page at the district as well. But it's ccsrealignment.com. And this is just a web page that gives you some background information, an overview of the project, so you can see the timeline. On this site, you can also go to you'll see a feedback form. And so there's a feedback form that pulls up your general feedback information. There's also the Public Advisory Committee here. Information on the Public Advisory Committee, and you can go here to fill out your application. This is ccsrealignment.com is the site that you would go to get to this, or if you go to the school district's page, it can direct you to here. And then we'll also be posting information as we have them. The Zoom webinar, the copy of this presentation will be put up here, as well as a recording of the meeting and things like that. And we're trying to give you as much information as possible as it's developed. There's also a site, a link for realignment option maps. We don't have any maps there right now, but the maps as they're developed, we'll put up, this will be a spot where you can go and see large PDF maps. If you don't like the virtual, the interactive map format, we want to give you different ways to analyze maps based off of your preference. Feedback form's good. Like I said, you can start providing us input at any time via this form, and that's what I was talking about that we will be tracking. And so yeah, the bottom of this just basically goes over the different components and things that are on the map links that I just previewed, and the online map can be found there as well. And so this is all I have to share at this point regarding the process. I mean, I just want to say it's been an honor working with this county over the past couple of years, and we are honored to be working with you on this effort. And we are compassionate about realignment, and we understand how the emotion that is involved in this and impacting students and families and communities. And so we will be working with that in mind as we develop options and work to a recommendation. With that said, I think that we do have a question posted in the Q&A. Let's see, Brian, would you like me just to go ahead and field that question or post it up?
Sure, yeah, I can go ahead and read it, and then I think you and Francis, or just you, or however you want to do that. So the question is, how are you assessing the number of kids in a zone with students that are in 100% virtual school options? So I'm going to take that to mean, so currently, as a result of the pandemic, we have students that are assigned to, that are attending their home district school or their choice school that have opted to be in 100% remote learning for the year. And I'm going to assume that this is also not the students who are enrolled in Virtual Academy, which is our separate standalone virtual school. So, yes, if Matthew, if you want to take that one, and then Francis, if you want to chime in on any of the virtual aspects, that'd be fine.
Sure, I'll go first, and that Francis definitely helped me out with this. But I think that it certainly is the topic of the year, and how are we going to do things with the state of the country right now with COVID and things like that. And there are students that are virtual, students who are hybrid, things like that, and so really what we're looking at is we're looking at the enrollment as of this year. But we're also going to be analyzing the 2019 enrollment numbers to see and analyze how much has COVID potentially impacted enrollment, so that we can be mindful of this. And Francis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if a student isn't a virtual school option, they're still coded and assigned to a homeschool based off of where they live. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if we're talking about the students who are assigned to their home school or their program choice school, but they've opted for remote, 100% remote learning, they are still assigned to that school. And so they would be assessed with the population of that school and their location, their student location.
So when we start counting students, we will assume, the assumption is that if that student is coded, whatever elementary school, middle, high school that student is coded to, even though they may be virtual in this particular time, the goal is to eventually get back to a full students in classes scenario. And so the way the students are coded, they're already coded at their home school. So as we do our realignment options, we will already be, in a sense, assuming that that student will be back in school when that time comes. Now, if there's students that attend a school that from out of zone, we're making sure that we're counting those students separately so that we don't unintentionally overload a building, like I was talking about with program choice students that were coming in from outside of different zones.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And Bobby Joe, if we did not answer that fully, please type in a follow-up question, because we want to make sure we fully answer the question that you're asking. Okay, so we have another question in the Q&A. Will there be active, ongoing surveying of new developments between now and the proposed August 2022 opening to understand student count impacts for the new school?
So I will take that one. We are currently, we actively keep up with, communicate and keep up with our local planners for the municipals, governments that are around us, as well as Cabarrus County, to provide feedback to them as they receive developments for our community. We are in the process of building up that data set for Cropper to use in their analytics. And I'd say we're about 50% through. Part of it is just the collection from all the various municipalities that we have. Those will be coded appropriately to know, is this development active, currently under construction? Has it been approved, or is it just kind of in the pipeline? So yes, that is, we know that's very important to kind of see where those impacts are coming from and what zones are going to be most impacted by new development.
Okay, and that is really a large part of Ms. Lane's role here in Cabarrus County Schools, is monitoring those developments and providing impact studies to developers so that they know how many students to expect and what the impact is on each school. So a large part of what Ms. Lane does. All right, we don't see any other questions in the Q&A box at this point. So we'll just kind of pause there briefly to see if there are any others. And Mr. Cropper, I want to thank you and your team for working with our internal planning team to this point, and all of the public information session work that you did to get ready for tonight. And we do really want to encourage the public to apply to be as a part of the public advisory committee. We look forward to being very transparent in this process. And we look forward to putting in a beautiful building here in Cabarrus County Schools, filled with some expert staff to serve our students and our community as well. So with that, is there anything else before we close up, Mr. Cropper?
No, sir. I'm good to go. Thank you. I just want to thank you guys again for coming out and participating in this, and look forward to regrouping with you here in a few months.
All right. Thanks to all the attendees, and we look forward to engaging with you further in the future. Thank you very much.